59 minutes. And this also includes patients who have delayed, taken time to give most of the delays because the patient delays in giving consent. There is usually no delay from our side. Most of us staying within the radius of about 2 to 3 kilometers from the hospital. So this is another typical anterior MI. Here there is totally occluded LED, full of thrombus. You can actually see big chunks of thrombus here, and some may even float beyond that. And this is evident here also. So once we did a thrombus-suction, this is the kind of thrombus we got. Some white thrombus, some red thrombus. And end result is excellent TB3 flow, good myocardial perfusion. We have a stent here, and this is in the iliacaudal view. We did a follow-up echo on this patient just 3 days ago at 6 weeks. Normal LV systolic function, no RWME. When the patient came in, he had an EF of about 30-35% with severe wall motion abnormalities in the LV territory. So aspiration thrombectomy, this is under a lot of debate. So what I feel is, if you're going into battle for the first time, when you're going into battle, it's better to win the first time. And don't sweep the thrombus under the rug. Remove the thrombus and then bring in the furniture, that means the stent. So what are the potential benefits of a thrombus aspiration? First of all, we can receive faster reduction of thrombus burden, reduce reinfarctions, improve TB flow, reduce the chances of a no-flow situation, reduce infarct size, reduce mortality, and possibly reduce the major adverse cardiac events. So this patient came in with an inferior MI with VT. Patient was wheeled into the cath lab with CPR going on, totally occluded RCA. It's a huge RCA with almost 5 to 6 millimeter RCA. This is after about half an hour of thrombus aspiration. We've achieved, big chunks of thrombus are still there, but we've achieved a fair amount of flow. And finally, we had to put in a renal stent here because we didn't have a coronary stent this size. So this is a 6 millimeter renal stent. So what does the data say? There are some meta-analysis which are available, which say that this was in 2008 by DeLuca, which said that adjunctive manual thrombectomy devices was associated with better epicardial and myocardial perfusion, less distal embolization, significant reduction in 30-day mortality, and these adjunctive manual thrombectomy devices, if not anatomically contraindicated, should be routinely used. Subsequently, with the same author, he published a meta-analysis in 2013, where he said that it was the outcome, the trend towards short-term mortality outcome was improved with the manual thrombectomy. The mechanical thrombectomy devices, like excisor, etc., despite the benefits in the perfusion, did not impact the short-term survival. The benefits of myocardial perfusion were significantly related to the amount of thrombus which is present. Though thrombectomy is not routinely now practiced, but in case there is evident thrombus, it must be used. So there's a little change in the thinking. So here we have another patient with anterior semi, totally occluded LAD, big chunks of thrombus in the LAD. This is again occluded here. This is a thrombus-suction catheter. We use an export catheter in this case, got TB3 flow. And at the end, look at the result. It's excellent patency, great flow, and time and time again, whenever there is visible thrombus, we find that, at least in our experience, that the flow is excellent, the outcome is excellent. There was a trial called the TASTE trial. So the editorial said there's no appetite for manual thrombus aspiration. However, though it did not give any additional mortality benefit at 30 days, there's a significant reduction in stent thrombosis, which just missed the significance, and there was strong trend favoring PCI plus thrombus aspiration for reinfarction at 30 days. So there is data that it helps, but maybe the design of these randomized trials are such that all comers, the statistics even out the benefit of thrombus versus aspiration versus plain PCI. The total trial again was a relatively negative trial where the routine use use of thrombectomy in PCI took another blow. But time and time again, we see data, we don't see angiograms like this. This is a totally occluded PLV, full of thrombus here. And here we did only thrombus aspiration. In fact, at the end of the day, we found that no residual lesion was there, so we did not even stent it. And this was a ectatic vessel. We had a similar procedure in the LAD about a year ago. Again, it was not stented because it was grossly ectatic and there was no residual lesion after thrombectomy. So the door of thrombus aspiration is not fully closed. The question still burns. And what I would recommend is that where there is visible thrombus, definitely do a thrombus aspiration, aggressive thrombus aspiration. You must keep aspirating the thrombus till you don't see any benefit in the next angiogram. And yes, but as for the trials go, I think the question is yet to be answered. So what do the guidelines say? The ACC guidelines say it is reasonable for a patient undergoing primary PCI. So guidelines still recommend manual aspiration. So what about use of stents? Placement of stent is useful. BMS should be given when you cannot give long-term dual antiplatelet therapy for these patients. Antiplatelet therapy, aspirin, loading dose of aspirin 162 to 325. And after PCI, aspirin should be continued indefinitely. A loading dose of either clopidogrel, prasugrel or ticagrelor. We are primarily using ticagrelor in our chest pain guidelines in our hospital. Loading dose and maintenance dose at least for 1 year. It is reasonable to give 81 milligrams of aspirin in preference to higher maintenance dose after the primary PCI. It is reasonable to start treatment with a GP2B3 inhibitor, either apixaban, tirofiban, or epitopetide in a patient where you feel that there is a high risk for a thrombus load. There is data to suggest that aspiration plus intracoronary apixaban gives you benefit as far as the infarct size is concerned at 30 days, as for the INCREASE AMI trial, and there's another trial where there is benefit in thrombectomy plus GP2B3A given intracoronary. Prasugrel should not be administered to patients with a history of prior stroke or TIA, and to elderly people and to people with low body weights. Your anticoagulant therapy to support your PCI, unfractionated heparinase bolus to maintain an ACT. You can also use bivalirudin with in a patient who's had some unfractionated heparin with ACTs coming to normal. You can use bivalirudin also as monotherapy when you have a high risk of bleeding, in preference to combination of unfractionated heparin and GP2B3 inhibitors. Fandopyrinox or Arexta should not be used as a sole anticoagulant because of risk of catheter thrombosis. So what happens at a non-PCI capable hospital? Thrombolytic therapy, fibrinolytic therapy is indicated when there is an anticipated delay in performing a primary PCI within 120 minutes. So in the absence of contraindications, fibrinolytic therapy should be given to these patients with the symptoms less than 12 hours. If the symptoms are more than 12 hours, if there is ongoing ischemia, one can still go ahead and give fibrinolytic therapy. Should not be administered to patients with ST depressions, except in two posterior MIs. So once you had a thrombolytic therapy done, what do you do to these patients? You must immediately transfer them to a PCI capable hospital if the patient is unstable, that means cardiac shock, severe heart failure or severe ongoing ischemia, and in cases with failed reperfusion. Also, once the patient is hemodynamically stable, you transfer the patient to a PCI capable hospital. An angiogram is usually done within the first 24 hours, but not before the first 2 to 3 hours. What about the PCI of a non-infarct artery before hospitalization? Possibility of several infarct-related arteries, all in patients who are hemodynamically unstable in cardiac shock. So in patients with cardiac shock, what do you do? There, multivessel angioplasty in a patient who has multivessel disease is recommended, and this was associated with decreased 6-month mortality for these patients. this is a patient with severe cardiac shock. The LED is totally occluded, the Davis is occluded, there's a recent occlusion of the circumflex, and a tight stenosis, instant venous stenosis of the right coronary. We managed this patient with an intra-aortic balloon pump. We vascularized the circumflex with the intraoperative artery first, then the LAD, and then subsequently the RCA. The patient did go home alive. Now some controversies being picked up by this recent trial called the PROMI trial, where they randomized these patients to imaging, PC of the infarct-related artery and showed some benefit. There are a lot of flaws in this study, and but what it leads you to think is that do we consider complete revascularization against infarct-only PCI in patients with acute STEMI? As they found that the risk of recurrent myocardial infarction is the highest in the first 2 days, and the early invasive strategy reduces adverse cardiac effects. I think it represents a departure from the current guidelines, but did not examine whether this preventive PCI should be done immediately during the procedure or in the same hospital stay. And we do not know whether this risk-benefit ratio would be preserved if the PCI performed soon after rather than during the initial procedure. So, to PROMI or not to PROMI is the question. One would recommend that if the patient is hemodynamically stable after the angioplasty, one should restrict the PCI only to the infarct-related artery, and maybe once the patient is stable before hospital discharge, one can consider PCI to the non-infarct-related artery if significant. So CABG patients with STEMI, urgent CABG indicated if there is the coronary anatomy is not amenable to PCI, and you can use mechanical circulatory support if the patient is unstable. Routine medical therapy, one is all aware, I will not dwell much on it. Routine beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, ARBs in patients who are intolerant to ACE inhibitors, aldosterone antagonists in patients with poor EF or heart failure, and high intensity statin therapy should be initiated for all these patients. The complications are cardiac shock. So when you have emergency revascularization, like I just mentioned, with PCI or CABG in these patients, and in the absence of contraindication, fibrinolytic therapy should be given to these patients in candidates who are not amenable to either PCI or CABG. Use of intra-aortic balloon pump is recommended, and alternately we can also use LVSS devices where they are available and the patient can afford them. In the electrical complications, ICD therapy can be given to a patient who develops VT/VF after 48 hours of the procedure if it is not because of a reversible cause, and temporary pacing is indicated for symptomatic arrhythmias unresponsive to medical management. And of course, you always have patients like this where you have dense thrombus burden in the LAD, thrombus burden in the circumflex. We tried everything. We struggled with this patient. Finally, we lost this patient. So still we have, we have need to work on it. I try to identify patients who are likely to undergo AMIs. There's a lot of work on vulnerable plaques and so on, try to prevent this related complications from happening. Thank you.
A big hand to both of them. Thank you, sir, for coming. Sir has came all along from Gurgaon for us, and sir has a very basic. Ram Sharma sir, as I know, is still smiling face. If anybody has to take a picture of smiling face, he can go.
Dharamshi Hospital, and Dr. Ritu Sharma, she is a pediatrician, and I would like if Dr. Pawan Sharma can join as one of the panelists because I don't have any cardiologist, all the questions are open for all the audiences. So let's start with it. Just to recapitulate, what are the normal physiological changes that occur during pregnancy and labor? Because pregnancy there, the mother, the female, if I say in Hindi, दिल बहुत बड़ा हो जाता है. So this is the pathology which later on occurs. So basically there is an increase in hypervolemia, there is an increased cardiac output, increased heart rate, increased pulmonary capillary ventilation, and increased left ventricular stroke volume. And what is the decrease? There is a decrease in the blood viscosity, decreased systemic vascular resistance, decreased pulmonary vascular resistance, decreased central venous pressure, and decreased colloid lymphatic pressure. These all changes are to facilitate the flow towards the placenta, so as the fetus can grow nicely. So just to have one question, ma'am, 35-year-old, gravida 3, parity 2, living issue 2, with a 8-month amenorrhea, presented with palpitation and breathlessness for 4 days, which is progressively worsening. She has no history of heart disease. She was on regular antenatal checkup. There is no past history of